Which is better, the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G or the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G? Well, in this video, we're going to find out. What's going on, everyone? This is Kevin here, and these are two 5G entry-level devices from Samsung. Now, the Galaxy A32 5G is certainly the older of the two phones, considering that the A13 5G is relatively new at this point, but the A32 5G, since being launched last year, has been a very successful device for Samsung, and it still is being offered at carrier stores. So I can certainly imagine a situation where you walk into a carrier store and you have the choice of these two devices. Now, both of these phones feature 6.5-inch displays, so they are large displays here, and the actual display technology is pretty similar as well, as they're both TFT displays. They're also both 720p, they both have a PPI of 270, they both have a 20:9 aspect ratio, and they both have the same screen-to-body ratio of 81%. Another similarity between these two phones is the overall form factor on the front panel. Both devices do have water drop notches for the front cameras, and they also both have decently thick bottom bezels. Now, one difference though between these two devices is that the Galaxy A13 5G has a 5-megapixel front-facing camera compared to the Galaxy A32 5G, which has a 13-megapixel front-facing camera. Now, both of these devices are offered in different storage configurations, but at least in the US, they both offer 64 gigabytes of internal storage, and we also get microSD card expansion. I'm certainly glad though that 64 gigs is the minimum default for these devices, as honestly at this point in 2022, 32 gigs really isn't even enough. As apps continue to get bigger and bigger, it definitely doesn't beat having as much internal storage on the device as possible. So again, I'm glad that they both have 64 gigs of storage. And then to make matters even better, you can always offload photos and videos, for example, to a microSD card. Now, neither of these two phones have wireless charging, but they both have fingerprint sensors on the power buttons. So let's give that a try right now, starting off with the Galaxy A13 5G. There we go. One more time. There we go. And we'll give it a try now with the A32 5G. One more try. So I feel like it is a bit faster with the A32 5G, but at the same time, they both have somewhat slow fingerprint sensors, not to the point where it's a deal breaker by any means, but if you are coming from a more expensive premium smartphone, you will notice that these fingerprint sensors are not quite as accurate or responsive. But again, they're not bad enough that it's necessarily a deal breaker for either of the two phones. Another awesome thing too about these devices is that they do both support Face Unlock, so I do like that we do have multiple methods for getting into the phones. Now, taking a look at the backside of the devices, we do have some differences when it comes to the various cameras that we're getting. So with the Galaxy A13 5G, we're getting a triple camera setup with a 50-megapixel main camera, a 2-megapixel macro camera for close-up images, and a 2-megapixel depth sensing camera for portrait mode. Whereas with the A32 5G, we have a 48-megapixel main camera, an 8-megapixel ultra-wide-angle camera that can take photos at up to 123 degrees. We have a 2-megapixel depth sensing camera and a 5-megapixel macro camera. So it is impressive that with the A13 5G, we do have a slightly higher megapixel count for the main camera at 50 megapixels, but in all other ways, the A32 5G is better. So for example, the A13 5G doesn't even have an ultra-wide-angle camera. So having that feature here with the A32 5G is really awesome. And then the macro camera does have a higher megapixel count with this device. Now here's how things look on the camera app on both devices, and this is with the main cameras right now. And then again, with the A32 5G, we do have that ultra-wide-angle camera that does crop things out quite a bit. This especially can come in handy when you're taking photos and videos on vacation, for example. Maybe you want to take a picture of a large building, for example. That's definitely where the ultra-wide-angle camera comes in handy. Then from here, we can go over to the More tab on both devices, and you can access the macro cameras, which allow us to take close-up images and still retain a lot of detail. So I'm glad that feature's there. Certainly a little bit more of a niche feature, but the more features, the better in my opinion. Then from here, we can go over to portrait mode to get those nice blurred out backgrounds. We can also flip around to the front-facing cameras to do the same thing. So there we go, there's me right there. We can also take standard selfies as well. And at least with the A32 5G, there is a group selfie option too, so it does crop out a bit. So it is a little bit disappointing that with the A13 5G, there's no group selfie option, but I suppose that's one reason to get the A32 5G over the A13 5G. Now, video recording with the A13 5G maxes out at 1080p with the rear camera, same thing with the front camera, whereas with the A32 5G, it is 1080p with the front, but the rear camera here can take videos at up to 4K at 30 FPS, which is definitely pretty nice. Now, getting into the RAM and processor for both of these devices, the amount of RAM that you're getting could differ based on where you're getting the phone from and what region, but essentially for these devices, we're getting 4 gigabytes of RAM with the Galaxy A13 5G versus 6 gigabytes of RAM with the Galaxy A32 5G. So that's different, and then also the processors are different. Now, with both of these phones, as the names do suggest, the processors do accommodate 5G connectivity, which is awesome, and both processors are MediaTek processors. But with the A13 5G, we're getting the MediaTek Dimensity 700 5G processor, whereas with the Galaxy A32 5G, we're getting the MediaTek Dimensity 720 5G processor. Now, I did run a benchmark test using Geekbench 5 on both of these phones, and I'll show you the scores from those tests right now, but essentially with the A13 5G, I got a single core score of 466 compared to the A32 5G with a single core score of 504. So a bit better with the A32 5G. And then when it comes to the multi-core scores, with the A13 5G, we have 1113 versus 1670 with the A32 5G. So surprisingly, these two devices do have somewhat similar benchmark scores, which is really good for the A13 5G especially. And then when it does come to multi-core, they are a bit different. But what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then compare your scores to these scores to get a better idea of how your current device compares to these two phones, because none of these numbers really mean anything unless you're comparing them to something else. But in general, I'm pretty happy with the performance that we're getting with both of these devices. They're certainly not the fastest phones ever, but they're certainly not the slowest phones either. So if you're somebody who doesn't spend a ton of time on your device, but at the same time you don't want a totally terrible phone, then I feel like both of these phones are good options. But if you are someone who is constantly on your phone, maybe you're constantly playing games, constantly on social media, then I probably would go for something a bit more premium. But if you are a smartphone user who just wants a decent device that will work when you need it to work, but at the same time, it's not something that you center your life around, then I do feel like both of these phones are good options. Now, when it comes to battery capacity, they actually have the same size batteries. Both phones have 5,000 milliamp hour internal batteries, paired up with the ability to charge at up to 15 watts. So it is nice that the batteries are very big, so definitely expect to get very good battery life. And then being able to recharge those batteries pretty rapidly is another added bonus. Now, as far as software goes, it's essentially an identical experience with these two phones. And if you currently have a Samsung device, even an older one, and you're switching to one of these devices, the experience overall will be pretty familiar to you, but of course, based on the version of the software that you've used in the past on a Samsung phone, some things could be different. But now that we've gone over the various features and specifications of these two phones, let's now compare the hardware. Now, both devices are made completely out of plastic, except for the displays, which are glass. But the designs are certainly a little bit different here. Now, the camera modules in general don't look too different. Really, the biggest difference is that we have one extra camera for the ultra wide angle camera, but the actual materials are a little bit different in the sense that we have a matte black finish with the A13 5G. I suppose that could be different based on what color you get it in, but it's a matte finish, whereas we have a glossy finish with the A32 5G. So it does look a bit more premium here with the A32 5G, but I suppose if you're putting a case on either of these two phones, then it really doesn't make a difference either way. The good thing is that both of these devices do at least feel of decent quality. Of course, they're not made of the highest quality materials ever, but for a lower end budget smartphone, both of these phones certainly don't feel cheap. Now, taking a look at the left side of the devices, we just have the slot for the microSD card and SIM card. Then on the right side of the phones, we have volume up, volume down, and then the power buttons, which are also the fingerprint sensors. Then up top here, both devices do have the noise canceling microphones. And then on the bottom, both phones have a pretty similar setup with a 3.5mm headphone jack, microphone, USB-C port for charging and data transfer, and the speaker. So in conclusion, I feel like these phones are definitely very competitive. The A32 5G is the better phone of the two, but they're really not that much different. We are getting a slightly better processor We're also getting 4K video recording with the rear camera. We're also getting a slightly better fingerprint sensor. We're getting more RAM as well. But in general, the differences are not quite as dramatic as you might expect, which I suppose is a good thing for the A13 5G because this phone really does provide quite a bit of value, that's for sure. So personally, what I would do is that if you are walking into a carrier store and you have the choice of one of these two devices, I would just see which one you can get the better deal on and probably go for that phone. So if they're running a really good deal on the A32 5G when you're in the store, then I would go for this device. But if they're running a better deal for the A13 5G, then I would go for this device. And if both phones happen to be exactly the same price, then I probably would go for the A32 5G over the A13 5G because of those added features. But I hope you enjoyed this comparison of the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G versus the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. But this is Kevin here, and I will see you in the next one.